Hi students, welcome to Turito live classes. Myself Tata Swagat here. I will be discussing the biological topics with you. Today we are going to understand about a beautiful structure which is incredible enough to build all our structures, the body structures what we have. All the life forms on the planet are built up of this particular structure called cell. So today in this process we are going to learn about three important understandings of the cell. That is, if you see here, introduction of the cell, morphology and cell theory. These are the three topics what we are going to cover today. So I want you all to have a detailed understanding in a while and make sure you are putting all your queries in the chat boxes and we will be proceeding further in that way. Here today, like I mentioned, we are going to understand few topics. So before going to that details, I would like you to tell you that there are few learner outcomes what we have to understand. Once you are completing this particular session, you will be able to understand some of these details given on the screen. If you observe here, we are going to understand about the invention of the microscopes and their applications to find out the structure what we are going to discuss. We need to appreciate the contributions of the inventors and scientists. So there are different scientists and inventors what we are going to learn about. We are going to understand them and we are going to appreciate their contributions for the science. Understand morphology of the cell. So how it appears, what does it have, these are the things what we will be learning in them. Explore the postulates of the cell theory. So we will be exploring the details of the cell theory. Understand different levels of organizations in different organisms, identify different organelles of a cell and we will be understanding them in brief. So these are the learning outcomes what we will be having once we complete this particular session. Now here, so throughout the world, by then there was not much advancement in the technology. So people started to think, especially the biologists, the scientists who were working on living organisms, they used to think that there are only one set of world exists which is visible to us, and other set of scientists they were trying to believe that there is another world which we cannot see with our unaided eye. This is what was their understanding, but this was a debated topic by then long back, and they used to think that no, there is no such thing occurring there. Now in the initial days of this particular debate, there were few scientists trying to work and find out whether any such world exists or not. In that process, there were few who wanted to figure out that yes, that is really existing. Now here on the screen you can see, which is not new to you, this is a simple microscope made by Antony van Leeuwenhoek. So you must understand one thing, like how he came to an understanding to or to design a microscope. Well, before designing this type of microscope, he was actually working in a textile industry. Yes, you must be very shocked to learn that. So he was actually working in a textile industry with the people who used to examine the quality of the fabric, which means I am referring to drapers. So Antony van Leeuwenhoek, he was actually working with the drapers, and drapers are those people who actually examine the quality of the cloth and then approve it for selling. Now how they used to examine the quality of the cloth is the question. They all, I mean the drapers, they used to have a hand lens with them. Using a hand lens, they used to check the quality of the cloth and then they used to approve it for selling. Now this was the idea what he picked up, that is Antony van Leeuwenhoek, and he thought, why can't I put this idea in that finding out the world which is unknown or invisible if it exists. Now using that thought, he designed a very simple microscope. It looks like this, that was in the year 1668 AD, and later he found that we need to understand its working. So, what he used was this, but for our understanding we need to have a better picture of the microscope, so that we can look at the labelings and the different parts, how they work along. So, if you have a look here, this is the image of the microscope what he used. If you observe carefully, there is a very small region which I have just encircled with the red color. You can see that is actually the lens, through which it is mentioned here as viewer's eye. So, these days we call that portion through which we observe the specimen is actually from the eyepiece. Now, next you can see there is a sharp structure which is given here, that is actually a specimen holder. That is exactly the place where a person would put up the sample to observe under the microscope here. So, that is what is mentioned here as sample holder, sorry, specimen holder. So, adjustment screw, you can see there is an adjustment screw. So, this is what it is referring to. So, this is the adjustment screw over here. Now, using that, it will be adjusted according to the length and the breadth of the specimen what they have placed on the specimen holder, and it should be aligned with the lens through which a person is observing it. Now, this looks very simple, and we must understand it is projected here in two different sides or the views. So, first one is actually the front view. So, front view we may not give you a detailed understanding of it, but when you turn it to the side view or the lateral view, you will see that there are different parts arranged. So, this was the very simple microscope what he used to understand the different structures of the organisms whatever he observed. Now, using this microscope, he tried to find out whether really the different world exist which they were having a topic of debate. Now, they found out yes, it was there. Later, after some point of time, one more person tried to find out the understanding. Here if you see, it was by Robert Hooke in the year 1665 AD. He was actually trying to find out what is there in a piece of a cork. So, as you all know, cork is something which is having no life, but that belongs to a plant component. Here he took a word from the Latin language called cella. So, cella is the Latin language, which means it means the compartments or the rooms or a chamber. Now, when he observed under the microscope, he found that there were different compartments present there, and looking at those compartments, they were arranged in an order. So, looking at them, he first thought of the word cella, which is actually having a literal meaning in Latin as chambers. So, he used the word cell in his first publications. So, he published a book named Micrographia, into which he observed those small compartments in the cork, and that is what he reported them in this, and he was the first one to coin the word cella. Now, cell is what he understood, and later these days we have a detailed understanding of the cell, and still scientists are trying to figure out more and more details of this particular structure. Now, he was the one who actually worked together Robert Hooke to find out the structure of the cell. So, hope you are following the details as of now, and in case if you have any queries, you can drop in the chat box. Now, this was a microscope used by the Robert Hooke in order to observe the cork cells. Now, some of you might be wondering what is cork. Even if some of you having an understanding, I would like to tell you, there are glass bottles used. Sometimes you see them, they are closed by a lid with the shape of a cylinder, and sometimes we see, when I was a child, I do not know these days, but when I was a child, I used to play cricket using a ball made up of cork. So, that is why we used to call it off as cork ball. So, we used to play with that. So, both of them are combining, they are composed of the plant components. So, even though it is a dead thing which is from the plant, we use it to have our needs fulfilled. Here, so these two people, it was not only the Antony van Leeuwenhoek, but also Robert Hooke. They both were involved in designing and fabricating microscopes. They were actually the ones which were giving the design how to make a microscope, because these are the guys in those days wanted to use the microscope and find out, observe the nature and understand it. Now, here whatever they made using their microscopes, they tried to reveal the unthinkable by then, and those microscopes were having an ability to magnify the object from 25 folds to 250 folds. Now, some of you might be understanding quite differently what do you mean by folds. So, here folds I mean 25 to 250 times. I mean, if the object size is x, let us say, then it can be magnified to 25x. In other words, if the object size is y, that can be magnified to a magnification of 250 y times. Now, this is what is increase in the fold of this specimen and to observe. So, you can understand this is really appreciable, and this is something really great by then to achieve this feat in order to observe the very tiny substances or the objects to observe under their microscopes. Now, that was really interesting. Now, here, so hope you understood the concept. Now, what you are seeing on the screen is actually about the morphology. So, some of you might be wondering what is morphology. Can anyone answer that? If you can answer that, please put it down in the chat box. Now, here if you see morphology. So, here we are actually not trying to understand morphology, we are actually looking into the morphology of the cell. So, that is cell morphology what we are looking into. Now, we have to understand what is cell morphology. Before going to that, we need to know what is morphology. You know, when you see a plant, what you can figure out is what is its height. So, I am saying when we see a plant, we see that how tall it is, what is its color, how thick is the stem, and what is the shape of the leaf. Like this, there are several features what you and me can make out by looking at a plant. So, this understanding what we can have just by looking at an organism is simply known as morphology, the external features I am referring to. Likewise, we are going to understand about the cell morphology here in this particular session, which is of divided into three categories here, which includes cell count, cell size and cell shape. So, this is what we are going to learn in this particular session. So, firstly, if you look here, there is so much data given here, might be wondering so much of information all at once. It is easy, fine. So, let us start here. So, the first thing what given here is actually about the unicellular organisms. So, unicellular organisms, what do you mean by unicellular organisms? So, I see you can drop in the chat box. So, those organisms which have only one cell within them and carry out all the life processes for their survival are known as unicellular organisms. Now, the question comes, What are life processes? Now, when you think here, life processes are very good and important processes occurring in our body too, like we respire, we digest the food, we show movement, we show sensitivity. All these are the result of various activities happening in our body, and those activities are the results of various processes occurring in our body. So, those processes I am referring here as life processes. So, here in the first statement you can see that we do not find that only unicellular organisms having the life processes. It is also organisms like you and me and various other plants and other higher order animals, they also perform this particular process, that is having all the life processes. Now, if you observe carefully, there are multicellular ones and the unicellular ones also have many cells with specialized functions. So, it is understood that in case of unicellular one there is only one cell existing, in case of multicellular organisms there are so many cells existing. So, there are trillions of cells are present in you and me, they all are working for our survival. Second statement, the multicellular organisms have specialized cells to perform this specific function. Here comes the game. So, they have specialized cells in them to perform their respective specific functions. Now, we have to understand what kind of cells they have. So, here we have to understand one thing as a continuation for the second statement, multicellular organisms have division of labor. Now, that is something interesting. What is your understanding of division of labor? What do you say about it? So, here the division of labor is quite simple. So, if you understand here, it is not present in the unicellular ones, it is only present in the multicellular organisms. It means those organisms which have more than one cell within them. That means, if there are more cells within an organism, those cells will be grouped and they will be assigned with different functions. So, different groups of cells would be performing different functions. Now, this division of different functions or division of different works within the group of cells of an organism is called division of labor. So, that is one such reason why the multicellular organisms have a longer lifespan. So, that is interesting, is not it? So, when you think of a unicellular organism, you will not find them having a longer lifespan, whereas the multicellular organisms, because of they possessing more number of cells within them, keeps the ability to live for a longer period because of this process of division of labor. Hope you got my point. If not, you can drop in the chat box all your queries and that would be answered. So, most cells are microscopic and can be viewed through a microscope. So, till now we were trying to understand the contributions of the people who were making the microscopes to understand the microscopic world. So, the unit used to measure the size of the cells is actually micrometer. So, as the name suggests, they all are in sync. So, microscope, so we measure it using the unit is micrometer, fine. So, 1 micrometer is actually equals to 10 to the power minus 6 meters. So, that is quite simple. So, here do you think there are different organisms on the planet, and if there is a bigger organism, it will be having more advantageous position than the animal or an organism with a smaller size? Is it so? Or let me rephrase my question. If there is a very small organism, it is having a less advantage because of its size. If there is a higher order animal, do you think it is having a big advantage because of its size? What do you think? Now, when it comes to size, it does not matter at all. It is about how an organism is functioning, that is more important. So, let us have a look here. Smaller the cell size helps in rapid communication. Now, that is an advantage here. So, if you see here, it says that smaller the cell size helps in rapid communication. So, communication is very important aspect of many things, not only within the cells, not only between people, between various other organisms. So, it is a common thing and it is a very important thing. So, communication is always important. So, if there is a quick communication occurs, there occurs a rapid transfer of substances within the cell by diffusion process. So, diffusion is one such process. We will be understanding about that process and one more process, that is osmosis. In the upcoming sessions. So, using these two processes, we can transfer the substances quite quickly within the cell and if required outside the cell also. Now, every cell has to get repaired because it is having several organelles within itself, and if the organelles are not functioning well, they have to be repaired. Well, you might be wondering, what are organelles? It is quite simple. Organelles are nothing but they are actually the different parts of the cell, and it will also lead to easy exchange of respiratory gases. Now, what does that mean? If there is a smaller in size the cell, it will help in easy exchange of respiratory gases. So, that is also an advantage. Now, even though going through all these points, you may be in a dilemma that what is that difference in the size and why smaller size is more advantage. So, that I would like to explain you in a while. It is very simple. Let this blue colored circle with a point or a center O having a diameter of AB. Let us draw another circle, and if you observe here with a center X and having a diameter of Y and Z. Now, by looking at it, you can tell me which of the one is having a shorter distance. Is it A to B or is it Y to Z? What is your answer? You can drop in the chat box. Now, if you observe carefully, you can tell me quite easily by looking at the circles what I have just drawn here. Circle with center O and having a diameter of A to B, and there is another circle with center X having a diameter of Y and Z. If you observe carefully, it is quite simple to understand that the circle with center O with a diameter of A to B is comparatively smaller than the circle with center X and having a diameter of Y and Z. So, it is quite evident that in the smaller cell, consider this as a cell that is with a diameter of A to B, let us say AB is the diameter of that cell. In that case, it is quite simple to understand that this particular cell is having a advantage over this particular structure because of its higher in diameter. So, having an advantage here for first circle is because it can communicate quickly within the cell, it can transfer substances quickly within the cell whenever there is a need. So, hope by this you understood why cell size matters a lot here. So, we are going to understand now about the cell shape. What is so important about the cell shape? Is it really matters cell shape, or we do not have to understand that? So, there are a few questions what we have to understand now. Fine. If you see here, this is a cell structure shown to you, and it is actually showing the division of the cell. It is quite simple that every cell has to divide. This is a structure which you have been looking into since quite a long time. So, you are looking at an organism which is one of the simplest organism and one among the the oldest one living on the planet. As you can see, it is a very simple structure you are looking at. You are looking at an amoeba. So, it is a very beautiful structure you are looking at. because it is irregular. Yes, the shape what you are looking at is actually an irregular shape, and you have various labelings here starting with the nucleus, and we have an endoplasm, we have ectoplasm, and we have a contractile vacuole, we have water vacuoles present over here, and most important, the food vacuole. So, when you observe carefully here, to us this may be a simplest organism, even though it is one of the simplest organism you are looking at right now, it is actually the fantastic one. With this irregular shape, we may think because it is having an irregular shape, it is not having an advantage over the other organisms. Having an irregular shape here for this organism is its advantage, because using this irregular shape, this organism makes a specialized feet like structure to travel or to hunt its prey. I am referring to pseudopodia. So, the word pseudo refers to false, podia means feet. So, pseudopodia are used by these organisms, and that is how they move forward and capture the prey. Now, using that is how they live. Apart from that, they are the ones having only one cell within them. So, this particular organism is actually, it is a single cell. So, this single cell is the one performing all the required life processes, starting from taking the food using pseudopodia and giving out the waste from the body to the outer environment using contractile vacuole. Now, this is really interesting to understand. Now, let us go to some other group of organisms and find out what kind of shapes do they have and what is that they have in special about. Now, if you look here, the first one is actually showing some of the bacteria with a shape of bacillus. So, this is also nothing new to you, because you have learnt this in your lower classes. The next one, if you observe, it is again the bacteria having a spear shape, cocci or coccus. So, having association between the same type, we see they are changing in the names, diplococcus, chain of cocci, or the cluster of cocci. In other words, we can also use the word colony. Now, the third one, if you see here, it is the spiral. So, it is actually having the spiral as if it is rotated a spring like arrangement. So, you see it is a spiralum or the spirochete. Now, what I am trying to show you is actually, in the previous slide you actually saw an organism called amoeba. It is entirely different organism. We cannot compare that organism with these, and these are actually bacteria, like I said. So, you understand that these are actually bacteria. So, that was a different organism having an irregular shape. Now, we are trying to understand bacteria about their shapes. Even though they all are bacteria, you are looking here, they are having different shapes. Again here, this is actually having a rod shaped, this is actually having a spherical shape, and this one is having a spiral shape. Now, what is that difference here? Even though they belong to the same group. Let me show you more. So, this one again, within cocci, if you see, there are different types, there are names, Streptococcus pneumoniae, this one Streptococcus pyogenes, and you see this arrangement, tetrad, Staphylococcus aureus. So, these are all nothing but the bacteria I am trying to show you. What about this? Again, the bacteria with the shape of a rod, when they combine together, you see it is a chain forming. So, it is Bacillus anthracis, and here if you see, one bacteria having hair like structures on its surface. So, there is a difference in the shape again. So, earlier you were seeing, earlier they were having a spring like shape or a spherical in shape, or they were having a shape of a rod. Here, in addition to the having a rod like shape, they are having some hair like structures. Now, that is also something interesting. What about this? Again, you see, observe carefully. So, Vibrios or Vibrio cholerae, there is a bacteria, you can see the structure, and it is having a tail like arrangement. Again, there is a change in the shape. Now, what is that change in the shape here all about? If you observe carefully again here, a bacteria is available and you can see there are different tail like structures, and again there is a difference. So, I just want to show you different types of organisms within a same group, that is bacteria. What is that driving them to have different shapes? The first one, that is amoeba, if you observe, I would like to take you back there. This particular organism, if you see, it is having an irregular shape, it lives in an aquatic medium, whatever shape it is having is its advantage in that medium. It makes pseudopodia and tries to capture the food, and that is how it works further. Coming to this, the first bacteria you are looking here is having a rod shape, and the second one, if you observe carefully, having a sphere shapes, and the third one, if you observe, having a spiral shape. So, there are no additional hair like structures on their bodies, but they are all belonging to the same group and they have different shapes. What is the reason? What could be the reason, children? Can you answer me that? Looking at the amoeba, looking at the bacteria like this, and now I would like to show you this. Look here. So, I would like you to have a look at them, observe for quite a while and try to put your answers in the chat box. So, you can have a look here, a chain of bacteria, and look at that. So, for your observation, I would like to erase all my markings on the screen. So, here it is clean, you can observe very well. Now, if you observe something, you can drop in the chat box why they have different shapes even though they are belonging to the same group. Why amoeba is having different shape like that. So, just like amoeba, you may find these guys also living in the aquatic medium, and it is because we are trying to understand them as bacteria. You do not find only in water or aquatic medium, we find them in varied ranges of the habitat, in soil, in air, in water, in ice, in very high high temperatured hydrothermal vents deep in the ocean, near the ocean floor, into the space also we find them. They have different shapes. So, that was a clue what I have given, that is the habitat is a clue for them. Now, if you observe this again, this is something interesting and you know again. So, we are trying to heading up again, we are trying to move ahead. If you see, this is a structure of a neuron. What about this? This is a blood cell, and this is a white blood cell, and this is actually a red blood cell. Now, if you observe carefully, what about these? So, there are cells of the intestine shown here, and there is a bone cell shown here, there is a gamete, that is ovum. We find ovum in females and we find sperm in males. Now, you have to understand something here, children. I would like to show you back, take you back there. This is a different organism, a single cell organism called amoeba. These are actually the bacteria what we are looking into. That means, first one was an organism I took, okay, that was having only one cell. This is a big group I am taking, that is bacteria, having different shapes within the very same group. So, there are some more shapes for your referral. You see here, they are having different shapes. What about this? This one what you are looking at is actually the structures of the different cells present in you, me and several other organisms like you and me. I am referring to humans, I am referring to various other animals, higher order animals. I am also referring to some of the animals which represents like you and me. So, these are the cells present in the multicellular organism. Even though these cells belong to the same organism, they have different shapes. Why is the question? I see there are answers. If you see that neuron, it is basically what we know it as a nerve cell. Okay. And there is a red blood cell and there is a white blood cell. So, they make up the circulatory system of our body. And if you observe here, these are actually the cells in the inner lining of the intestine, which are actually resembling, or they are actually the ones which compose our intestinal villi, which you have gone through in the higher classes, that is in class 7th, I am sorry, in the lower classes, that is in class 7th. Now, if you observe here, this is actually our bone cell. How about these gametes? So, you must understand one thing, children, what I am referring here is, even though they all are belonging to have different shapes, but they all are ones which are present in the same organism. All of these are found in our body, except the gametes. You see there is a difference I have shown there. Now, that is what we have to understand. Even though if they belong to the same group, they have different shapes. Even though there is a single organism like amoeba, it is having a weird shape, having irregularly shaped. All the reason for this is the function what they have to perform. It is because of the function what they have to perform that makes them to have the respective shape. Without this particular shape, you may not find the bone cell functioning to make our bones. Without the shape of the sperm like that of a fish like arrangement, you cannot expect the sperm to function the fusion process. Excuse me. So, hope you understood. So, hope you understood the different shapes why they have and the structures of the cells. So, that is one aspect of the cell morphology which we are trying to understand. Now, here if you see, we are going to look into the another detail of the today's session, that is cell theory. If you observe, there were 3 scientists shown here. Apart from these 3, in those days the communication was quite limited. Nowadays, we have a very quick communication setting and we try to communicate from this part of the world to that part of the world within fraction of seconds. Now, here there were different scientists over there then, and they were trying to understand the details of the cell, because it was in the peak time. You can see it is in 1800s where there was enough understanding of the cell was taken and different scientists across the globe were working on the cell to find out what is it is having. In that course of action, there were 3 who actually involved in understanding the cell, and it is because of their contribution came up to the concept of cell theory. Now, it is quite interesting to understand the cell theory. 3 scientists named Matthias Kleiden, Theodor Schwann and Rudolf Virchow. So, they were working independently in order to contribute the understanding of the cell. So, they were working continuously, and you see the first one gives rise to the first postulate: all living organisms are made up of cells. So, he says that all living organisms are made up of cells, and the second postulate comes up from the second guy, Theodor Schwann. Cell is the fundamental and the basic unit of living organisms. That is what he said. Okay, that is fine, that is good to understand. The first guy says that all the living organisms are made of cells. That is correct and widely accepted. The second one says, because all of them are made of cells, so it is understood that cell is the fundamental unit and basic unit of living organisms. That is correct, but there was a problem for this theory. After having formulated the first 2 postulates, there was a problem. That is, for the first time, first 2 postulates were widely accepted throughout the world for quite a long time. If you observe here, it was in 1838 by Matthias Kleiden and Theodor Schwann in 1839. So, with a very quick successiveness, you see that they came up with first 2 postulates, but there was a problem. No one was able to answer by then. The problem was, where do we get these new cells from? If a cell is there, by then they have an understanding that cell dies because people are dying by then because of various reasons. They saw animals were dying, they saw plants were dying. Now, when they all were dying, there must be something to be solved. There is a puzzle here. How new and new cells are coming up, that is the problem. In order to answer that question, this person, that is Rudolf Virchow, he was started making the function and he understood something here. That is, in the year 1855, you see that Rudolf Virchow, he came up with a understanding of the third postulate. That is quite simple here. That is, he says that all cells arise from pre-existing cells. Can you tell what is pre-existing cell? What is your understanding about it? So, you are actually looking at a solution of a problem. Till then there was no problem, but after the second postulate there occurs a problem asking where do we get these new cells from. So, to that this guy answered it. He says that all cells arise from pre-existing cells, which means his literal meaning was quite simple, that is, old cells gives rise to new cells, which means simply already existing cells will be working together to give rise to new cells. That was quite simple. Now, we have just gone to all the postulates of the cell theory, but we need to understand them in detail. So, let us have a look into their understanding. So, there are few points mentioned here. So, cell theory, the first one says that one or more cells, which means whichever organism you come across, it will be having either one or more than one cell. Yeah, it is accepted. When you have seen the first postulate, he said that all the cells are made up of, all the organisms are made up of cells. So, that is accepted. So, when you see one or the more cell making the organism, it is quite evident that they are the fundamental units of life. Whichever life you look at, maybe a plant, a very small plant, or a very big tree, or a very small organism like amoeba, or very big organism like a blue whale. Even though you cannot compare their sizes, but you need to understand one thing, that it is the cell having the forming the fundamental unit of life. Now, the third one saying here in different language, which some of you or many of you may not understand, it is saying that omnis a cellula. So, what is that? Omnis cellula a cellula, what is that saying here? It is actually referring to the third postulate of the cell theory, which means it is actually taken in the Latin language, and it says that all cells arise from pre-existing cells. So, it is quite simple. So, old cells are giving rise to the pre-existing cells. Now, if you observe carefully, so we can understand one more thing here, the basic chemical composition. Whichever cell you talk of, whichever type of organism you are looking at, it is having cell, then you may understand that whether it is a plant cell, animal cell, or a fungi cell, it will be having the almost same chemical composition, which means same chemicals are making it up. So, you see other point here, organism's activity is determined by the way cells function. So, whatever an organism is doing, it is actually the result of the different activities performed by the cell itself. So, at the root level, whichever cell is functioning on its way, that is reflected in the organism's activity. The last statement, it says that organization of cells which actually shows up the structure of the organism. It is quite simple. Let me take you back here. That statement says that organization of the cells which actually makes up the structure of the organism. If you observe here, there are different cells shown here. Okay. They all are the cells present in a single organism. Let us say it is present in the human cells they are. Even though you see them, they are having different types of shapes within us. It is their organization which makes us to have our respective shape. This is what is mentioned in this particular last statement. So, organization of the cells determine the structure of the organism. These 6 points explains us about the details of the cell theory. Now, let us move further and we understand some more things. So, this is again you have to understand and quite simple thing. By looking at this structure, what can you make out? I want you children to observe the structure here and try to come to a conclusion. Whatever you can think of, you can drop in the chat box. It is actually showing an organism, it is showing an organ, and it is showing a tissue, and there it is showing us a cell, ultimately a cell organelle. That is quite simple. Now, if you observe carefully, it is quite simple to understand. There is an organism here, it is a very big organism, it is having a stem, branches, leaves and a flower you can see here, and roots are underground. It is quite simple to understand because that is a plant. Now, this plant have different organs, and one such organ is shown here as a leaf. So, if there is an organism of multicellular leveled organism, it will be having an organ and it will also be having tissue within itself. A tissue is nothing but the combination of different types of cells performing same function. If there are different types of tissue present and they are composed of different type of cells, so certainly you understood just now tissue is composed of cells, and every cell will be having different parts within itself. One such example given here is chloroplast, that is an organelle. So, this actual structure and the sequence what you are looking at is actually the level of organization. So, we see different leveled organisms in different organisms, ranging from unicellular organisms to the higher leveled organisms. Now, this is a structure of the cell. I just want you to have a look at it, having different labelings. You can see these are actually labelings showing us the different organelles present in a cell. Now, can you guess what kind of cell is it by looking at its structures? I want you children to observe it for quite a while and just let me know what is it you are looking at, which type of cell is this. You can drop in the chat box. Okay, it is quite simple to understand by now, because so far you have an understanding. You see there is a nucleus given here, it is quite common, endoplasmic reticulum, we have ribosomes, Golgi apparatus, centrioles are present. Now, this is our clue to the answer, centrioles, and there is a cytoplasm, we see that mitochondria and plasma membrane. These are some of the organelles and the parts of the cell present here, and they are very important to us. Now, if you observe carefully, it is actually representing an animal cell, because in an animal cell you will find the presence of the centrioles, which I told you it is the clue. Okay. Let us move forward again. So, whatever you have just seen, they are just listed here, and you might be worried that we have to go through all these topics now. Not really needed as of now. I just wanted you to have a look at the different names of the organelles present in a cell, starting with nucleus, ribosomes, Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticulum, nucleolus, mitochondria, vacuoles, vesicles, cytoskeleton, and in the bacteria you have seen some of them were having tail like arrangement because of these, that can be flagella, cilia or pili. These are something different here, you have to understand. Presence of cell wall, chloroplast and central vacuole, they are the ones which are exclusively present in the plant cell. So, we need to understand something, it is these some of the features, they are only found in the plant cells, whereas other features if you observe, that is lysosomes and centrosomes, they are exclusively found in the animal cells. Hope you understood the concept by now, and here we are to understand that we have to look into the topics whatever we have learnt so far. If you look here, we have to summarize the topics. So, it is shown here, that is Antony van Leeuwenhoek was inspired by the Drapers, like I said, he was working in a textile industry and he was with the drapers, they used to examine the cloths using the hand lens. So, these drapers were to invent the microscope, and that was the idea, because they were using the hand lens. He picked up that idea to put it forward to make a structure called microscope in order to observe the microscopic world. The second point, that is, Robert Hooke coined the term cell from a Latin word called cella. That word came up to his head when he was observing the cork, which is a dead plant component. Cell morphology. So, we looked into the structural aspects of the cell, what kind of size it is having, what kind of shape it is having, and you see that how it is functioning. We also understood about the 3 postulates of cell theory. So, we were having an understanding of the postulates of the cell theory, and we saw how it came up to the understanding, and there was a problem in the cell theory, and that was solved by the scientist, that is Rudolf Virchow. Other details like different levels of organization, and finally, we try to understand by identifying different types of the organelles using a flow chart as well as using the structure of an animal cell. Hope you understood the session today. If you have any queries, you can ask me later and we will be clarifying them. Thank you.